Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Massar, anchor of Bloomberg Businessweek on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV. We have a great panel with us, and I want to get right to it. Michael Novogratz is with us. He's the CEO and founder of Galaxy Digital. He's also the chair of the Bail Project, founding partner of the Reform Alliance. And speaking of the Reform Alliance, we've got the CEO, Robert Rooks. He's also co-founder of the Alliance for Safety and Justice. These two individuals have done so much work when it comes to criminal justice reform. And I've got to say, looking at some of the statistics out there, it's just not a great system. We've got the U.S. with the highest prison and jail population, highest incarceration rate. We talk about recidivism. So many individuals end up back in prison. We've got to do better. And I feel like you two individuals are really working with your teams to do that. So let's start with kind of the big, broader conversation, Mike and Robert. I feel like if we don't have the right conversation right now, we don't get to a better place ultimately. So, Mike, what do you think has to be the conversation around criminal justice reform right now?
Well, sure, great. I mean, to start with, I think we need to grade ourselves. And on a 1 to 100, we're about a 12. We really are an F. We have a horrific system that degrades people from the moment they're arrested. And so if you think about the process of criminal justice, right, there's supposed to be some justice, which we have all kinds of racial biases, so there's not a lot of justice. But there also needs to be an end goal. And the end goal in the U.S. system really is caging people. It's degradation. It's humiliating people. There's nothing that tries to bring people from the system and bring them back as whole citizens. You can contrast that with what happens in Europe, right? To be the warden of a prison in Germany or in Norway, you need a master's or a PhD in rehabilitation. Every single prison warden I've met in the United States starts as a guard and moves his way up the system with no formal education. And so the whole system in the U.S. isn't geared to helping people deal with their trauma. And so we need a system that literally looks at people as citizens and says, okay, these people have screwed up. We're going to take their liberty for a while, and we're going to help them re-enter society as productive taxpayers. And we don't have that. We have a system that comes from the echoes of slavery that sees people as other, and that degrades them, that strips their dignity the entire time. And so they leave prison often more broken than when they entered. And so it's just, it's economically a stupid system. It's morally a bankrupt system. And we need to overhaul from top to bottom.
And the sad part is, and the commonality I found in kind of reading in for this panel about both of you, is that you really are trying to get, in particular, to those people who are, unjustly caught up in the criminal justice system. Robert, come on in on this in terms of what you think, what Mike just said, and what you think needs to be part of this big, broad conversation so that we get it right.
Carol, thank you so much for the question. And Mike, you hit it right on the head. And I'm going to come at the question from a personal perspective. I grew up in Dallas, Texas in the 80s and 90s. I saw firsthand a community dealing with the crack cocaine epidemic. I experienced firsthand what it was like to live and grow up in that community where our needs were around treatment and poverty, but we got incarceration. We got cops and bars instead. And so over the years, what we've seen is this generational impact on misplaced investments in our communities. And our communities have suffered. So now we have a system that has 2.3 million people incarcerated, 4.75 million people on probation and parole. We have government bureaucracy out the wazoo, and we're not doing anything to solve or address these issues. The conversation we need to be having right now is one about solutions. People have been organizing in the streets for years, and we have done nothing about it, systemically nothing about it. And I think now is the time of listening, and we need to put forward real solutions so we can organize ourselves for a better tomorrow.
And listen, there is no doubt about it. Socially, the social component of just doing the right thing ethically, but there's a statistic I came across that about some 70 million Americans with criminal records are barred by law or stigma from contributing to the economy. I mean, there is an economic impact. There's a business impact. So let me ask you, and this is coming from our audience, what role can business play in decreasing the rate of people entering the criminal justice system? Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I think they could play a big role. I mean, there's a Bojangles box behind me. I'm an investor in that company, and me and our team at Galaxy, we pushed the management to hire formerly incarcerated. And it took 6 months of going down there and trying to convince them. And when they finally did, they were shocked at, when they announced it, they had managers crying that, wow, we'd be a company that would actually hire my second cousin who's been unemployed for the 3 years he's been out of prison. And so, there was an emotional win, but it turns out there's a whole lot less turnover with guys that get their first job and get started. And in the quick serve restaurant business, turnover is a big cost. And so it's been a hugely successful program. And so part of this is educating businesses that formerly incarcerated citizens can make great employees. Some of it was working with the state of North Carolina in this case to change their parole laws, right? We have horrific and stupid parole laws in America. It's like we put marbles on an ice skating rink in front of returning citizens who are barely standing to start because they've just been in jail for 6 years or 8 years, and say walk. And so one of the Reform Alliance's main missions is, probation and parole. So in North Carolina, in that case, we worked with the Attorney General to change the parole rules for our guys so they couldn't get sent back for a speeding ticket or an illegal U-turn or a stupid parole violation. Because you can't be an employer and have an employee not show up and not know where he is because he got put back to jail for something dumb.
So, Robert, you too, as part of your platform and what you're working at Reform Alliance, is jobs are an important part of this. I mean, I feel like the last year, so many of the inequities, systemic problems in our society, there's a money component, there's a wealth component, there's an economic component. Talk to us about how jobs can prevent somebody from going back to jail, can put them on a completely different trajectory.
Absolutely. Let me answer both of your questions. The one you asked Mike on corporations, and then I'll end with jobs. The truth of the matter is most of the laws that created mass incarceration came from politicians and media. Corporations didn't have anything to do with it at the beginning. However, corporation policies perpetuate over-incarceration and systemic neglect for people. The 70,000 barriers that people face, many of them have to do with employment opportunities. So here are some very specific things corporations can do. Number one, background checks. Corporations do not have to use background checks as a way of keeping people out of those particular jobs. Background checks absolutely should be used. People should know who's coming in, but it should not be a single factor for people that have felony offenses in terms of keeping them out. So that's number one. Two, licensing. Licensing is something that's used quite often these days. Often really good jobs are connected to licensing. So even though there may be some corporations that be willing to hire people that are directly impacted or coming back from prison and jail to society, state licensing standards could exclude people. So if there is a way corporations can engage in advocacy to ensure that state licensing aren't systemically leaving people out, that would be amazing. Another key thing that corporations can do is to start to see the entire community and the full person. The truth of the matter is people on probation and parole are living their lives in their homes, but they are still in prison. And what I mean by that is individuals often have stipulations to their probation and parole that keep them from work, that keep them from providing for that family. Let me give you one example. An individual may have a 9:30 a.m. meeting with their probation officer, a 3 o'clock meeting for anger management or drug treatment, and then they have to be at home on curfew from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Where are the opportunities for people to work? How can someone provide for their family if that's their day, if that's their schedule? So we need to have laws that allow people to check in with their probation officer, but also be able to work and provide for their family. That's what we need, and corporations can help and engage in that process and change those laws.
All right, my question, I just a quick follow-up. Why don't we have those laws? Why hasn't it changed?
That's a great question. I've been thinking about this a ton. I was actually talking to my wife about this last night. When I make the case to people that we should get rid of parole and we should replace it with life coaches, every single person I've ever made the case to said, well, that sounds like a great idea. We have vested interests that perpetuate the system. The prison unions, the parole officer unions, the police unions, they are really strong. And there is a prison industrial complex that profits from caging people. It's unethical, it's immoral, but it's real. In states, you take black kids from Philadelphia and you ship them to a red county in somewhere in Pennsylvania, and they count on the census in that red county, and that county gets more vote, more representation in the state legislature, and they seem to think longer prison sentences are a good thing. And so that system is so hard to break. Listen, I think George Floyd, in the uproar around George Floyd, when everybody saw a man get murdered in real life, it changed the psychology of America. And I think it opens up a window for us to actually make real change. But man, this change is hard because it's fought at the state and local levels with arcane politics and, people that have a vested interest not to change.
Well, if we're counting
Robert's been a master
Robert,
at fighting these battles.
I was going to say, Robert, talk to your experience, because if we're going to rely on politics to change this, I feel like that's just really discouraging.
Well, listen, we need to understand how we got here. And the way we got here was in an unholy alliance between elected officials who use tough on crime language, the media who sensationalize crime, and a narrow network of crime victims who allow their stories to be used by electeds and the media to build mass incarceration. So that's how we got here. In order to figure out what we need to do next, we need to address elected officials and talk about real solutions, real alternatives. You see, probation was actually originally founded, Carol, to be a pathway to reentry, to get people back connected to work and family. That was their original purpose of probation. Because elected officials has politicized the issue of crime and mass incarceration, probation officers and probation departments are fearful, right? They're doing their work in a cloud of fear, because if someone was to commit a new crime under their watch, they are fearful to lose their job. Well, that's not reality. We need to create real solutions for people. We don't need to have probation officers fearful for their jobs and people on probation fearful that if they literally go shopping after their curfew, that they may get sent back to jail or prison. That's not the way we should be doing things. We need to advance real solutions. What are the root causes? When I think about growing up in Dallas and what should have happened in the 80s and 90s, it should have been a system addressing root causes of crime and violence. That's what should have happened. So if we think about root causes, number one, people on probation need jobs. They need to be employed. They need to be connected back to family. They need to be part of civic society. They don't need to be in jail at their homes. And so if we can get to root causes and offer people real help and support and real connection, those that are dealing with addiction need addiction support. They need treatment. And so I want to shift how we deal with people on probation from being punitive first to being help first. And having coaches like what Mike talked about is exactly the way we need to move.
Well, and I love what you said about, we need to kind of present the reality. And Mike, help me out here, because my understanding is Galaxy Gives, you guys have hired previously incarcerated individuals. Tell me about that experience.
Listen, we have, two of the smartest people that work in the entire Galaxy complex are both people who spent time in federal prison. Alex Duran, spent 13 years. He is a graduate of the Barred Prison Initiative. And if there was any one thing that changed my mind, I went up to a prison in Fishkill up in New York, and I met with probably 8 or 10, mostly African-American men in their mid-30s to 40s that had gotten this undergraduate and now some graduate degrees from Bard. It's the same degree you'd get if you went to Avon on the Hudson. And the level of scholarship that these guys had was what I'd expect from PhD students at Cambridge. It shocked me, actually. Maybe it's, I shouldn't have been so shocked. I was literally gobsmacked at how thoughtful and intellectual, and the guys were pretty funny. They're like, dude, We got a lot of time to study in here. But it really, if you ever wanted to believe in second chances in life, that was such a loud and clear message of, my goodness, these guys had different opportunities growing up than I did, and they screwed things up at times. But that doesn't mean their life is over. It should be over, right? And so I hired Alex. He had been out for a few years. He's a brilliant guy and a brilliant thinker and committed to helping the cause. And so, listen, it's to some degree a miracle that people come out of the system like Alex Duran. I just interviewed a guy, Wallo267 from Philadelphia, who came on a different path. He is charismatic. He is doing good. He's building a huge empire. And so these are the exceptions, not the rule, though, right? And so they should be the rule, not the exceptions, right? The system should be meant to create more Alex Durans and Wallo267s. And it's not. And so, yes, we're hiring. I'm actually trying to hire formerly incarcerated guys for our crypto business right now because they're brilliant. They're brilliant people that go through the system.
Well, and Robert,
Carol,
go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, let me approach this from a different perspective. Ultimately, people are asking government to act like businesses. If corporations had a 60% failure rate, they wouldn't be around, right? They just would not be around. So let's say you have an issue or a problem in your corporation. I'm going to use $1 as an example of how to respond to that. So let's say you had $1 to spend to address this issue or problem. You might say you use 50% to rapid response to the issues as they emerge, and also 50% to prevent that problem from happening, right? No one would say, let's spend 99% of that dollar to do rapid response to that problem, only 1% to prevent. That just makes absolutely no sense, but that's exactly how the criminal justice system is built. And so all people are asking for is to shift how resources are spent so we can invest as much in prevention and treatment as we do on accountability. We want people to be held accountable. Let's be clear. The call for criminal justice reform is not a call for a lack of accountability. Accountability is important and essential to the process. We just also want investments in prevention and treatment and addressing root causes of crime.
All right, so we've got about 3 minutes left here, and I'm just thinking there's leaders in the audience, there's CEOs, heads of institutions. So what do you say to them? Because it sounds like if we leave it up to policymakers or, politics, it's not going to get fixed. What can corporate leaders do specifically? Mike, you guys have had a good experience by hiring, people who have been in prisons. But what's your advice to leaders that they can take back to their teams and say, let's think about this differently. Let's do this.
Well, so to start with, I'd say, join the Army. And there's a growing criminal justice reform army. When I got involved 3.5 years ago, there was only about $150 million of philanthropy coming into the space each year. That number is probably close to $1 billion right now. And so you see a groundswell of people that say this is a real problem. And so the Army is faith-based groups that are working on this thing that have been working. There are groups like the one Robert's been on. There's the ACLU. There's all kinds of people that are attacking this problem, and it's starting to change the narrative. And so corporations can start with, we're doing, we're trying to do once a month. We bring in a leader, and they talk about what they're seeing and doing, and so we're educating our own employee base. And that was a call from the employees that didn't think we were doing enough after George Floyd. And I kind of scratched my head. I was like, I think I'm doing a lot. But the guys that weren't in our philanthropy group, that were in our normal business, wanted to do more. And so we're actually, showing them what can be done. It's what Robert did. Start looking at where you can hire people, right? Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And, every company has some jobs that somebody who, formerly incarcerated can be in. And then it starts changing your mind. Like if you had told me 5 years ago that I would have had 8 people at my house over the last year that had spent time in prison for murder, I would have been shocked. But I've had 8 people spend time at my house, and I would have let them babysit my kids. People can change. People are not their worst moment. They go through a transformative process, some people, and they come out whole and healing, and usually wanting to give back. And so, Brian Stevenson always talks about proximity. You've got to have some proximity. You've got to meet people that have been in jail. You've got to meet people that have suffered the indignities of prison. And that changes your level of empathy. It changes your understanding.
That's a really good point. There's so many people too removed. Robert, come on in, please.
No, it's a brilliant point. Proximity is important. There's a couple of things. One, go to reformalliance.com. Join our fight. We're going to be changing laws all across the country. We need corporations. We need business leaders to weigh in. Number two, business leaders are in discussions with governments and governors all the time, negotiating tax breaks, negotiating employment incentives. We would love for them to ask the governor or governor leader, what are you doing to facilitate reentry in your community? How are your probation laws? Do you have probation caps or not? Do you have probation stipulations that are undermining people's ability to work? That's what we need, because if government sees advocates on one side and corporations on the other, they'll do the right thing. Thank you.
All right, Robert, Michael, thank you so much. And everybody, check out the Bail Project, check out the Reform Alliance for all the work they are doing, and everybody step up. Guys, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.